The saloon girl took an unknown bride's ring, and the lonely cowboy put it back on her finger. Imagine a 22-year-old girl forced to work in a noisy, smoky saloon, finding a wedding ring in the mud on Main Street that would forever change the course of her life. Ruby Mae Sullivan was not like the other girls who worked at the Golden Nugget Saloon in Deadwood Falls, South Dakota. She had come there out of desperation, not choice, and her green eyes still held traces of the innocence that life had tried to destroy. On that rainy October morning in 1884, when she bent down to pick up that golden ring, glinting from the mud puddles, Ruby didn't know she was about to find not only a lost jewel, but also her own salvation in the hands of a lonely cowboy who would see in her much more than the world could see. The ring lay there, half buried in the mud of Main Street, like a small treasure forgotten by the gods in a town that seemed abandoned by fate. Ruby Mae carefully cleaned it with the hem of her already dirty dress, noting the fine workmanship of the gold, the small diamond that sparkled even under the cloudy sky, and the inscription inside, "To my beloved Helen, with eternal love, James." She looked around, expecting to see some desperate bride searching for her lost jewel, but the street was empty except for a few horses tied to posts and the silent presence of a tall man watching from afar, leaning against the wall of the hardware store, as if waiting for something he himself didn't know what it was. Share this story to reach further, subscribe to the channel, share this video on WhatsApp, and leave a comment telling me where you're listening from. I'll be very happy to read each comment. Now, let me tell you a story that will touch your heart about how a simple lost ring can become the most unlikely symbol of redemption you've ever heard. Ruby Mae Sullivan had arrived in Deadwood Falls 8 months ago, bringing only a cardboard suitcase and a heart broken by broken promises. She was 22, but her green eyes carried the weight of someone who had lived far more than she should have for her age. Ruby came from a small farm in eastern South Dakota, where she had grown up with dreams of becoming a teacher until the devastating drought of 1883 ruined the family's harvest and forced her father to sell the property for a fraction of its value. Her parents had left for the West in search of a new life, but Ruby stayed behind, promising to join them as soon as she had enough money for the trip. What she didn't expect was that getting that money would require sacrificing everything she held sacred about herself. The Golden Nugget Saloon was the kind of place where men came to forget their disappointments and where women like Ruby were forced to smile even when their hearts were breaking. The owner, Bartholomew "Bart" Mackenzie, was a burly man with a greasy beard who treated his female employees more like property than human beings. Ruby worked serving drinks, dancing when the music played, and enduring the rough hands and vulgar comments of customers who felt that paying for a drink entitled them to treat her however they pleased. She wore tight, brightly colored dresses that Bart personally selected, heavy makeup that hid the tears she shed every night, and a fake smile that had become her survival mask. The other girls in the saloon, Coral, Violet, and Daisy, had developed a thick skin to protect their hearts from the daily brutality. But Ruby still couldn't fully accept her situation. She woke every morning hoping that day would be her last, that she could scrape together enough money to leave, that she would find a way out of this life she hadn't chosen. Ruby kept every penny she could save in a tin hidden under the straw mattress in her tiny room upstairs from the saloon, counting and recounting the coins every night, calculating how much longer she would need to buy her freedom. She wrote letters to her parents that she never sent because she couldn't explain where she was and what she was doing to survive. Ruby had grown up in a religious family where she had been taught that a virtuous woman was the greatest treasure anyone could have. Now she looked at herself in the cracked mirror in her bedroom and saw only a distorted version of who she used to be. She wondered if her parents would be ashamed if they knew where she was, if there would still be a place for her in a family that had raised her with values so different from the reality she now faced. Ruby tried to hold on to the hope that her situation was temporary, that she could still rebuild her life and become the woman she had always dreamed of being. But with each passing day, that hope seemed more distant and unrealistic. During her darkest moments, Ruby took refuge in the books she could borrow from the town's small library. She read in secret, by candlelight, devouring stories of heroines who faced adversity and found redemption through true love and courage. These stories were her escape, her reminder that there was a world beyond the smoky walls of the Golden Nugget, a world where women could be respected, loved and valued for who they truly were. Ruby clung to these narratives like anchors in a storm, keeping alive the flame of hope that her own story could still have a happy ending. Ruby's daily routine was monotonous and oppressive, waking up at noon, eating a meager breakfast, getting ready for work in dresses she hated, and spending her afternoons and evenings serving men who saw her only as entertainment. She had learned to spot the most dangerous clients, to avoid compromising situations, to maintain an emotional distance that protected her from getting too involved with anyone. Ruby had become an expert at smiling without showing her soul, at dancing without revealing her heart, at existing without truly living. But on that rainy October morning, when she found the lost ring in the mud on Main Street, something inside her awakened. A sense that maybe, just maybe, her life was about to change in ways she couldn't even imagine. Ruby May cleaned the ring with reverent care, as if holding something sacred. The gold gleamed in the dim light of the overcast morning, and the small diamond caught the rays of sunlight that managed to penetrate the heavy clouds. She had never held anything so precious, so delicate, so full of meaning. The ring represented everything she had lost: purity, hope, the promise of true love. Ruby imagined the woman who had lost that precious jewel, probably walking the streets of Deadwood Falls, heartbroken, desperately searching for the token of her engagement. The inscription, "To my beloved Helen, with eternal love, James," made Ruby feel a pang of envy mixed with compassion for this unknown Helen, who had been loved enough to receive such a beautiful promise. Ruby tucked the ring into her dress pocket and decided she needed to find its rightful owner. She spent the day discreetly inquiring among the other saloon girls, the regulars, and the town's merchants, but no one knew of a Helen who had lost an engagement ring. Ruby posted a small ad in the local newspaper offering to return an item of sentimental value to its owner, but received no response. She visited the Methodist church, thinking perhaps the woman had lost the ring during wedding preparations. But the pastor didn't know of any Helen who was about to get married. With each passing day without finding the ring's owner, Ruby felt more connected to that little jewel, as if she had been destined to find it. During her nights at the saloon, Ruby kept the ring hidden in her pocket, discreetly touching it whenever she felt particularly discouraged or humiliated. The ring became her secret talisman, her reminder that there was beauty and true love in the world, even when she was surrounded by men who treated her like an object. She began to imagine what it would be like to have someone who loved her enough to give her such a ring, someone who saw in her not just a saloon girl, but a woman worthy of love and respect. Ruby found herself daydreaming, imagining a different life, where she could wear a ring like that and know it belonged to someone who truly cared. Ruby also began to notice a subtle shift in her demeanor. She stood taller, spoke more confidently, and there was something in her eyes that hadn't been there before, a spark of hope that the ring had rekindled. The other girls in the saloon commented on the change, saying Ruby seemed different, more radiant, as if she'd found something she'd lost. Bart Mackenzie noticed the difference too and didn't like it, preferring his employees to be broken and submissive. He increased the pressure on Ruby, giving her the toughest customers and the longest shifts, trying to break any remaining spirit she might have recovered. 3 weeks after finding the ring, Ruby had all but given up on finding Helen. She began to consider the possibility that the ring had been lost long ago, or that its owner had left town, or even that there was no Helen at all, that the ring had been discarded or lost under circumstances she would never discover. Ruby began to think of the ring as a gift from fate, something placed in her path to remind her that she was still worthy of love and respect. She decided she would keep searching for Helen, but if she couldn't find her, she would keep the ring as a symbol of the life she hoped to one day have. It was during one of these reflective nights that Ruby noticed a different man in the saloon. He was sitting alone at a corner table, not drinking much, not bothering the girls, just observing everything with sad, tired eyes. There was something in his posture that suggested an invisible weight, a pain he carried silently. Ruby felt strangely drawn to him, not because of his physical appearance, but because of the melancholy stillness that emanated from him like an aura. She approached to pour him a drink, and when their eyes met, Ruby felt something she hadn't experienced in a long time, a genuine connection with another human being, a mutual recognition of two souls who had suffered and yet continued to hope for something better. Caleb Stone had arrived in Deadwood Falls 2 weeks earlier, carrying only a worn leather suitcase and a broken heart he didn't know if it would ever heal. At 34, Caleb was a tall, thin man with dark hair, touched with premature gray and blue eyes that had lost their luster after losing everything he loved most in the world. He had been a farmer in Nebraska, owning a small but prosperous farm where he raised cattle and grew corn, and was about to marry Helen Patterson, the daughter of the local banker, when a series of tragedies devastated his life like a tornado, destroying everything in its path. Drought had ruined his crops, disease had decimated his livestock, and creditors had taken his land, leaving him with nothing but debt and bitter memories of dreams that would never come true. Helen Patterson had been the great love of Caleb's life, a sweet and intelligent woman who had accepted his marriage proposal with tears of joy in her eyes. Caleb had saved for months to buy her the engagement ring she deserved, a delicate gold piece with a small diamond that sparkled like the stars under which he had proposed. They had planned a life together on the farm, with children running around the yard and peaceful afternoons on the porch watching the sunset. But when Caleb lost everything, Helen found herself pressured by her family to reconsider the engagement. In a painful conversation that still echoed in Caleb's memory, she had returned the ring, saying she couldn't marry a man who couldn't support her, that she needed to think about her future and financial security. Helen's rejection had been more devastating to Caleb than all the financial losses combined. He had believed their love was strong enough to overcome any adversity, that Helen would stand by him no matter the circumstances. Discovering that she loved him conditionally, only as long as he could provide comfort and security, had broken something inside him that he didn't know if he could repair. Caleb had left Nebraska on a cold morning, carrying the ring Helen had returned, with no clear destination, only the need to get away from all the places that reminded him of the life he had lost. Caleb had spent the last few months wandering the West, working on different farms, taking whatever jobs he could find, trying to rebuild his life from scratch. He was a skilled and reliable worker, but there was a sadness in his eyes that kept him isolated from other men. Caleb had become an expert at appearing functional on the outside while falling apart on the inside, smiling when necessary, talking when work required, but always maintaining an emotional distance that protected him from getting involved with anyone again. He had learned that trust was dangerous, that love was risky, and that it was safer to live as a ghost than as a man with hopes and dreams. In Deadwood Falls, Caleb had found temporary work on a farm outside of town, tending cattle for a local farmer who needed help during the fall season. The work was familiar and comforting, reminding him of the days when he had owned his own land. Caleb stayed in a small room above the hardware store, a Spartan space that suited his current emotional state. He avoided unnecessary social interaction, but occasionally visited the Golden Nugget Saloon, not for fun, but because the noise and activity helped him feel less alone without requiring genuine interaction with others. It was during one of these solitary visits to the saloon that Caleb first noticed Ruby May. There was something about her that immediately intrigued him. Perhaps it was the way she maintained a quiet dignity even in the saloon's seedy surroundings. Or perhaps it was the fact that her eyes held the same kind of sadness he recognized in himself. Caleb observed how she treated customers with professional politeness, but without genuine affection, how she smiled without it reaching her eyes, how she seemed present in body but absent in spirit. There was something about Ruby May that awakened in him a compassion he hadn't felt in months, a desire to protect her that contradicted his resolve to remain emotionally isolated. Caleb didn't yet know that this saloon girl carried in her pocket the same ring that had symbolized his own loss, nor that fate was about to intertwine their lives in ways neither of them could have foreseen. On Caleb's fourth visit to the Golden Nugget, Ruby May finally approached his table with a tray of drinks. She had noticed how he always sat alone, how he drank slowly and observed everything with eyes that seemed to see much more than the surface. "Good evening," she said softly, placing a glass of whiskey on the table. "You're new in town, aren't you?" Caleb looked at her, noticing how she spoke differently from the other girls in the saloon. There was a politeness in her delivery, a genuine kindness that contrasted with the surroundings. "Yes," he replied simply. "I arrived a few weeks ago. I'm working on the Morrison farm." Ruby nodded, feeling a strange connection with this silent man who seemed to carry the weight of the world on his shoulders. "Can I sit for a moment?" Ruby asked, glancing quickly to make sure Bart wasn't watching. Caleb nodded, and Ruby sat in the chair next to him, carefully adjusting the dress she hated wearing. "You look different from the other men who come here," she said, choosing her words carefully. "There's a sadness in your eyes I recognize." Caleb looked at her in surprise, not expecting a saloon girl to be so perceptive. "And you," he replied, "look different from the other girls who work here, like you shouldn't be here." Ruby felt tears well up in her eyes at the observation, because that was exactly how she felt, like she was living the wrong life, in the wrong place, being someone she wasn't. For the next few minutes they spoke with an honesty that surprised them both. Ruby told him about her family, how she'd come to the saloon out of necessity, and about her dreams of becoming a teacher that seemed increasingly distant. Caleb shared about his lost farm, how he'd worked his entire life to build something that was destroyed in a matter of months. They discovered they had much in common. They'd both lost their families, their dreams, their identities, and now they were trying to find new purpose in a life that seemed to have lost its meaning. "Sometimes I feel like I'm just existing," Ruby confessed, "waiting for something, anything, to give me a reason to keep trying." Caleb nodded, understanding perfectly what she meant. It was at that moment that Ruby, without quite knowing why, decided to show Caleb the ring she had found. She took it out of her pocket, placing it carefully on the table between them. "I found this a few weeks ago," she said, "in the mud on Main Street. It's inscribed to someone named Helen. I've been looking for the owner, but I can't find her." Caleb looked at the ring and felt as if he'd been punched in the gut. His hands trembled as he picked up the small piece of jewelry, immediately recognizing every detail, the design he had personally chosen, the diamond that had cost him 3 months of saving, the inscription he had so carefully engraved. "My God," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "This is the ring I bought for Helen Patterson. She gave it back to me when we broke off our engagement." Ruby stared at Caleb in shock and disbelief. "You're the James from the inscription?" she asked, her voice trembling. "You're the man who loved Helen enough to give her this ring?" Caleb nodded, still staring at the piece of jewelry as if he were seeing a ghost. "My middle name is James," he explained. "Caleb James Stone. I gave this ring to Helen 4 months ago when I asked her to marry me. When I lost everything, she gave it back to me, saying she couldn't marry a man who couldn't provide for her." Ruby felt her heart break at the pain in his voice, understanding now why he always seemed so lost, so utterly defeated by life. "How did it end up in the mud of Deadwood Falls?" Ruby asked, genuinely confused. Caleb took a deep breath, gathering his memories. "After Helen returned the ring to me, I was so devastated I couldn't look at it. One night, when I was particularly drunk and desperate, I threw it in the street, thinking it would be better to rid myself of all memories of her. But the next morning, when I realized what I'd done, I went out searching desperately for it. I've never been able to find it." He looked at Ruby with an expression that mixed gratitude and pain. "You cared for him all this time. You protected him when I couldn't." Ruby felt tears stream down her face, touched by the vulnerability of this strong man who had confided his most painful story in her. In that moment, she understood that fate had placed that ring in her path, not only to return it to its owner, but to connect her with someone who understood her pain better than anyone ever could. Caleb held the ring for long moments, his hands trembling slightly as he processed the improbability of what had just happened. Ruby May watched silently, watching him struggle with emotions he'd clearly tried to bury for months. "You should keep it," she finally said, gently pushing the ring toward him. "It's yours. You bought it with your own money, with your own hopes." Caleb shook his head, placing the ring back on the table between them. "No," he said, his voice firm but thick with emotion. "This ring was meant to symbolize love and commitment. Helen rejected it because I was no longer worthy of it. Perhaps the time has come to find someone who is." Ruby felt her heart race at the implication of his words, but didn't dare read too much into what he was saying. "Ruby May," Caleb continued, looking directly into her green eyes, "you are the most genuine woman I've met in a long time. You found this ring and could have kept it, sold it, or simply ignored it. But you chose to look for its owner, to do the right thing, even when no one was looking." He paused, taking a deep breath. "You don't deserve to be in this place being treated like this. You deserve love, respect, a life where you can be who you truly are." Ruby felt tears well up in her eyes because no one had spoken to her like that in so long that she had forgotten what it felt like to be seen as a person of value. "Caleb," Ruby said, her voice barely above a whisper, "you don't even know me well. You've seen where I work, what I do for a living. How can you talk about me deserving love when—" Caleb interrupted her gently, placing his hand over hers. "Ruby, I see beyond what you're forced to be. I see the woman you truly are, kind, intelligent, strong enough to survive impossible circumstances without losing your soul. You're exactly the kind of woman who deserves to wear a ring like this." Ruby looked at him, hardly able to believe that someone could view her with such compassion after knowing her situation. At that moment, Bart Mackenzie approached the table, his face red with anger. "Ruby May," he growled, "you're not here to chat with customers like a society lady. Get back to work immediately." Ruby stood up quickly, accustomed to obeying Bart's orders, but Caleb stood up too, placing himself between her and the saloon owner. "You don't have to talk to her like that," Caleb said, his voice calm but firm. "She was just doing her job, serving drinks and being polite to a customer." Bart looked at Caleb with contempt, unaccustomed to being challenged by anyone. "Look here, cowboy, you're not in charge here. If you want to talk to respectable women, look elsewhere." The humiliation in Bart's words made Ruby flinch, but it also awakened something in Caleb he hadn't felt in months, a righteous anger, a desire to protect someone who couldn't protect herself. "Mr. Mackenzie," Caleb said, his voice taking on an authority Ruby hadn't heard before. "Ruby May deserves to be treated with dignity, like any human being. If you can't see that, then you're the one with the problem, not her." Bart flushed with anger, but there was something about Caleb's presence that made him hesitate. "You're causing trouble in my establishment," he finally said. "Finish your drink and leave." Caleb nodded, placing a few coins on the table to pay his bill. Before leaving, he turned to Ruby May, who stood there, clearly shaken by the confrontation. "Ruby," he said, picking up the ring from the table and gently placing it in her hand, "I want you to have this, not as a symbol of what I've lost, but as a promise of what you can have. You deserve true love, and one day you will find someone who sees in you exactly what I see." Ruby looked at the ring in her hand, then at Caleb, feeling as if she were living a dream. "Caleb," she whispered, "what if that someone is you?" He smiled, a sad smile but full of possibility. "Then come find me when you're ready to find out." With that, he left the saloon, leaving Ruby May holding the ring and a hope she didn't know still existed within her. 3 days later, Ruby May Sullivan woke before dawn, donned her simplest, most modest dress, grabbed the small tin containing her savings and the ring Caleb had given her, and walked down the stairs of the Golden Nugget for the last time. She had spent the last 72 hours thinking about Caleb's words, the way he had defended her, the way he had looked at her, not as a saloon girl, but as a woman worthy of love and respect. Ruby counted her savings and realized she finally had enough money to buy a train ticket to anywhere she wanted to go. But instead of setting off to find her parents, she knew there was something she needed to do first. Ruby left Bart a letter, returning the clothes he had given her and all the cheap jewelry that had been part of her uniform. In the letter, she wrote, "Mr. Mackenzie, I am leaving this job because I have discovered that I deserve to be treated with dignity. Thank you for giving me work when I needed it, but now I need to find a life that matches who I truly am." She signed it simply, Ruby May, and placed the letter on the kitchen table where he would find it. Afterward, she walked through the quiet streets of Deadwood Falls until she reached the Morrison farm, where she knew Caleb was working. Caleb was in the corral, feeding the morning cattle, when he saw Ruby walking toward him. She wore a simple blue cotton dress he'd never seen before. Her hair was loose and gleaming in the golden sunrise light, and there was something different about her posture, a determination, a courage that hadn't been there before. "Ruby," he said, dropping the feed bucket and walking toward her. "What are you doing here?" Ruby stopped in front of him, took the ring from her pocket, and held it out to him. "I came to return this to you," she said, her voice steady despite her nerves. "But this time, I'm returning it because I want you to give it to me again, the right way." Caleb looked at her, trying to understand what was happening. "Ruby, I don't understand." She smiled, a genuine smile that lit up her entire face. "Caleb James Stone, you said I deserved true love. You said I deserved someone who saw me for who I truly am. Well, I believe you are that someone." She took a deep breath, gathering the courage to continue. "I left the saloon this morning. I'm not going back. I don't know exactly what I'm going to do now, but I know I want to figure it out with you if you want the company of a former saloon girl trying to rebuild her life." Caleb felt his heart expand in a way he hadn't experienced in months. He took the ring from Ruby's hands, but instead of putting it in his pocket, he knelt right there, in the dirt of the barnyard, surrounded by curious cows and under the endless Dakota sky. "Ruby May Sullivan," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "you are the bravest woman I've ever known. You taught me that beauty can be found even in the darkest places, that dignity can be maintained even in the most difficult circumstances. Will you marry me? I don't have a farm to offer nor a beautiful house, but I have a heart that has learned to love again because of you." Ruby looked at Caleb kneeling in the dirt, holding the ring that had connected them in such an unlikely way, and felt like her life was finally beginning. "Yes," she said, reaching out to him. "I want to marry you. I want to build a life with you, wherever that life takes us." Caleb slid the ring onto her finger, and this time it fit perfectly, as if it had been made for her from the beginning. They kissed there, in the corral of the Morrison farm, surrounded by the simple beauty of a new day, two wounded hearts that had found healing in each other. 6 months later, Ruby May Stone, she had proudly adopted the name, stood on the porch of the small house she and Caleb had built together on land they had bought with the money they had both saved. Caleb had found work as a foreman on a larger farm. Ruby had opened a small school for rural children, and together they had built a life based on love, mutual respect, and the knowledge that sometimes the most unlikely endings are the most beautiful. Ruby looked at the ring on her finger, which now symbolized not a broken promise, but a promise kept, and whispered a prayer of gratitude for that rainy morning when she had bent down to pick up a lost ring in the mud, unaware that she was picking up her own salvation. And so, a lost ring became the symbol of 2 lives found, proving that sometimes our greatest treasures are discovered in the most unlikely places. Ruby May and Caleb built a family based on true love, where the past didn't define the future, but only made the present more precious. If this story touched your heart, subscribe to the channel for more stories of redemption and hope. Share this video with anyone who needs to believe that it's never too late to start over, and leave a comment with which part of the story touched you most. Thank you for being part of this journey of discovery and true love.